Hello, Detroit and the world. Welcome to another episode of Authentically Detroit, broadcasting live from the Lower East Side here in Detroit, powered by the East Side Community Network and sponsored by none other than the Ford Foundation, now a content partner to the new bridgedetroit.com. I'm Donna Givens. Donna Givens Davidson. Orlando Bailey is on a well-earned vacation this week, so I'm hosting solo in his absence. Thank you for listening in and supporting our efforts to build a platform of authentic voices for real people on the east side of Detroit. We want you to like, rate, and subscribe to our podcast on whatever platform you listen to us on. We drop a new episode every week, so turn on those notifications. Today, we're happy to welcome Branden Snyder from Detroit Action and Misha Stallworth from the Detroit School Board and Citizen Detroit, joining us to discuss the upcoming election that will take place just under a month from today. Welcome, Misha. Welcome, Branden, to Authentically Detroit.
Thank you for having me. What up, though? I guess that's a proper way to introduce. So.
Yes.
Yeah, we're happy to be here.
All right, so we were talking just before we got started today about life during COVID. What has your week been in this COVID-19? Are you still locked down? Are you hanging out? Are you walking out without masks now that the Supreme Court says it's not necessary to listen to the governor anymore? How are you feeling?
I'm personally a fan of a mask and a visor. That's like my favorite way to be. Every now and then I can kind of drop the mask when I need to eat something, if I got the visor there ready to go. But no, I mean, we definitely leave the house here and there, have eaten at restaurants, are tipping more than we would normally when we did, because our service workers really need that. And shoot, beyond that, I just feel like I'm at the grocery store every other day.
Right.
Yeah. I'm a typical bachelor, so I'm door dashing more than what I would ever do. Like, I think I was at the grocery store, a little less frequently than I would usually be there, but I've been it's been more door dashes than I was expecting this year. So that's a little off, but all in all, most of my time I've been more hunkered down. So I've been, right where I'm sitting at and right where I'm at, I've been working for the last 7 months, in my dining room, at my dining room table with my dog, to my left. And, and then when I do go out, I think I've been out maybe a few times this year. So me and my girlfriend, we did a road trip. Which was ridiculous, but that's another story. We went to we drove from Detroit to DC to Atlanta to Baton Rouge to St. Louis to Indiana, and then back to Michigan, and that was wild. But for the most part, I've been hunkered down.
Right.
Say it again.
So wild in a good way, right?
Wild in a good way, but it was also ridiculous because those were the states that were COVID hotspots. You would see
president, you're just chasing COVID, trying to get it.
On the road, on a world tour for COVID, a COVID tour. It was wild. We were in Alabama, and we were trying to go see the lynching monument in Montgomery. And we were driving to Alabama, and we stopped at a gas station. There was no mask whatsoever. People, the guy was trying to give them away at the counter, and people were just like, "Nah, I don't want to wear a mask. It's all right." So I'm like, I gotta get out of here.
That's rough.
Yeah, it is absolutely rough. I'll tell you what, though, when I read the President of the United States said that catching COVID was something he wanted to do, it's his patriotic duty. I wish I could vote today. I'm telling you. Actually, I can vote today, right?
Yes, yes, you can.
And we'll talk about this a little later, but I want to be one of those people whose votes counts on election day. Because on election day, I think the expectation is that Trump is going to be ahead, and then the mail-in votes or the absentee votes are going to catch people up. And I'm like, I don't want to contribute to even the illusion of success. So I have my absentee ballot at home, but I'm not going to use it. I'm not going to fill it out. I'm going to actually go to the polls and make my vote count that day. But yeah, we traveled to Northern Michigan twice, actually. We went to Newaygo, Michigan for Kevin's birthday, and then we honeymooned on Mackinac Island. And so I did get a little travel in. And we have been to a couple restaurants, but everywhere we went, people were pretty much complying with the mask order.
Yeah.
And when we went places and everybody's complying, because you know how masks work, when you wear a mask, it partially protects you, but it protects you more when other people have on masks, right?
Yep.
So, but when Sharkey and others are saying, let's open up the economy by not making people wear masks or whatever his thinking is, it will have the opposite impact on me. I will go out less. I will shop less because I don't trust other people to wear masks many places unless they're forced to. Now, Oakland County is established its own mask requirement. I know that the health department has, but for me, that's really serious.
In Macomb County didn't. They said that they're, just going to like take it by chance, and which means that I'm not going to Macomb County anytime soon. So
yeah.
Right. Not that it's there to begin with. But.
Right. And as an East Sider, come on now, it's easier to go to Macomb than other places. But you know what? The one thing I have is time. I'm going to get in the car and drive somewhere. Although I will say, I do have a new friend. Her name is Instacart. And I like the idea of shopping at home, getting all my coupons lined up. And, and I feel like, it's adding to the economy. Somebody gets to stock the store. Somebody gets to ring it up, and then they get to bring the food to me in the comfort of my own home. So I don't know if that's making me lazy or what, but I'm really enjoying some of the new economic features that I would never have used. No, that's a lie. I used Instacart before the pandemic. I'm not telling the truth.
Oh, you all laughed when I said I was door dashing, but Instacart counts in that same vein as well. Like being able to, I've ordered Instacart, GoPuff, and GoPuff is just all junk food. So like you can go in there and get like Baby Bell, packets or something or whatever, and they'll bring it to your door. But those have been my go-tos.
The way you said it, it just made me wonder when the last time was you had been to the grocery store.
I have to get dog food. So I went maybe like last week or so, and I bought like some real groceries. But like I go less frequently than y'all probably, because if y'all cook at home. But I go enough to where I know where the grocery store is. Let's just say that.
I'm really, really proud of you. Petco delivers too, so I'm not trying to. I don't know what that means. How do I know this? I'm not saying I order stuff for my cats through Petco, but yeah, I had a big Instacart order. I was just going through all of the stores, making sure that we could take care of all of our needs. So I hope the week is going well for you. We are recording midweek this week because there's so much going on, so many issues that we're trying to address. I feel like we're running out of time before November to make sure everybody knows enough about everything to make good decisions. These are things we probably would have started in April, and COVID took us off track, and now we have to try to play catch up in these last couple of months. But we're going to do it fresh off the press. My fresh off the press, we'll only do one today, is Bridge Detroit from Bridge Detroit Magazine. And that is that hold on for a minute, I'm sorry. The majority of teachers vote yes to ratify a one-year contract. And this contract is being reported as making Detroit teachers some of the highest paid teachers in the region. Some of it has been misreporting. Some of it looks like the top teacher's salary is $75,000. Is that true, Misha?
That's the top?
Yes.
Yeah, that is true. I think the way they've been reporting it, they're saying, now the average pay is the highest in the region. So, when you talk about averages, of course, there are going to be folks for whom that does not apply. But that is the top, and the entry level is the highest in the region for sure.
And that's awesome, because there was a time when Detroit public schools and charter schools were paying about the same amount. And then in suburban schools, of course, the teachers were starting out much higher. And so if you're trying to attract teachers with credentials and interest, paying a good cost of living makes a big difference. I think it also helps attract more Black and other BIPOC people to the district, because Black people don't necessarily have the luxury of working for less.
Right.
Because we have student debt to pay and we have households that we have to maintain. And so, the Black tax makes our lives more expensive. So,
although we do work for less anyway, right? Because we're paid less.
We do, but when you're trying to, I know that it's been, the competition for Black teachers has just gotten fiercer and fiercer over time. Fewer are entering the School of Education and fewer are also coming to work inside of urban districts. And a lot of Black teachers come and go because it doesn't pay off. I feel as though this salary change, this contract will help teaching pay off for more Black teachers, and that will be good for Black students. Do you agree with that, Misha?
I do agree with it. I mean, I think that the pay is one thing. I think there are other changes we've been doing that make the organization also just feel more affirming to Black staff, right? Because you can get paid, but then if you're in an organization that hates you, you still don't really want to be there. Right. So I think kind of like the anti-racism work we've been trying to pull together, which is slow, but necessary. I think all of those things paired with the pay make it more attractive to Black folks and other people of color. At least that's what it would attract me. I put it like that. I try to think about things as like, okay, where would I want to work and build in that way?
What are your thoughts on that, Branden?
I mean, I think it's a good win for working people, by and large, teachers who are coming into the profession and teachers who are working in the district, are not wealthy folks, so it ensures that people who are able, that hopefully can live in our neighborhoods and live in our communities, can have a decent day's wage for hard work. And so I think that's one. The other really good thing that the union was able to secure out of that was pay raises for substitute teachers and for retirees returning to the district. So as we need more good teachers who are going to throw down and support our students, it also means that being able to make sure that they're compensated. So I think broadly it's a good thing and it's a step in the right direction. It's a step in the right direction for working people, especially in this moment where working people, are enduring so much.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. I think that it is a good step for working people. I do want to say, beyond respect from the district, the teaching profession has taken a beating in the past, I don't know, 10 years, 12 years. However, when people decided they were going to reform education, a lot of people decided that meant that they were going to beat up on the teaching profession, mm-hmm. regulate it to death, and just make it more difficult. One of the challenges, and we don't talk about this often enough, is No Child Left Behind mandated specific credentials that teachers had to have in order to function in schools. And to some extent, that's a good thing, because that means that school districts were able to ensure they had qualified staff. And to some extent, it squeezed out people who may not have had formal credentials, may have had teaching skill. And a lot of the people who ended up being forced out of the profession were Black and other people of color, which really harmed, I think, diversity inside of districts. And we don't talk about that enough. Is a teacher who's been teaching for 20 years without a formal teaching certificate or without formal training in certain areas as qualified as a first-year teaching college graduate who does have those credentials? Did we ever weigh experience and say we're going to grandfather some people in because we know they're qualified? And when you look at some of the access to the profession barriers that exist, I'm interested in seeing how we're going to allow more people from different backgrounds to get into the profession of teaching. Not that I'm against the professional route that we have, but it's so hard if you did not know as a freshman in college that you wanted to be a teacher to switch into that profession. If you already have your bachelor's degree, the requirements are pretty expensive and onerous. And I think that those are barriers that we can overcome based on the research that we now know, that having a Black teacher, having a Black male teacher makes a whole lot of difference in the academic achievement of students. Is that something that is being discussed at the school board, Misha?
I mean, I think You layered out so many things. It's been interesting, definitely over the last 4 years, and especially in the 16 election, the debate around teacher certifications and certified teachers. It kind of became like, given what was happening with our state politics, that became this very like political lightning rod, right? Like certified versus non-certified. And one of the things that I've always been interested in is to say, okay, but what is the certification process?
Mm-hmm.
Because the certification process is not one that actually prepares you to be an effective teacher, then what are we even arguing about? And so I definitely think that to your point about kind of things being overregulated. The other component, though, is that when you have one school or two schools that you're responsible for, it's a lot easier within that small population to be really flexible. Every time we start to scale up, 52,000 students, 4,500 staff people, and then try to think about, okay, how are we providing quality? That's when stuff gets a little more rigid. So I think striking that balance is really, really important. But for me, if a teacher is taking the time to be creative with their lessons, to engage students, to bring in additional information that helps to enrich the experience and develop critical thinking skills, like those are the things that really matter to me in terms of like a high quality teacher.
Yeah, I mean, I just think more pathways. I'm not suggesting that we have uncertified teachers. I'm suggesting that the pathway to certification is inherently racist. The pathway to get into college is inherently racist in the way these programs function. And so you weed people out. And the profession of teaching has never been whiter than it is right now. And so we really need to look at what's happening on a professional level, not on the school district level, and say, why do we have pathways that do not facilitate entry of people in here? Now that we have a living wage, I'm interested in seeing highly qualified folks who are really doing a great job figure out a pathway that does not cost them $1 million and doesn't take them so much time that they cannot afford to become teachers.
Right.
I look at it too also as what are we learning from other how can labor also be instrumental in supporting the pathway for non-traditional folks to get into the ranks. Labor's self-interest is they need to be able to have union members and they need to be able to fight for those members. And so how are we making sure, how are they thinking about for the long term, for folks a lot of my friends who did not go to college that I grew up with on the east side down the street from ECN. How do we make sure that they are able to, if they want to become teachers, that they're able to do fellowship programs and the sort of training programs that move them up the ladder? And I think that it's just a great irony when you think about the argument that you were talking about, Misha, about, unregulated and regulation versus non-regulation, and the fact that for most of the conversations, regulation is being spoken of, from the right. They're against it, and then when it comes to these moments, they're like, well, we don't really. So I think that we could just do more to think about how we're swelling the ranks, and I think this is also a place, to be honest, too, for community groups, and labor to also lean in and get creative and help do the recruiting.
Yeah, and my mom chose teaching as a second career, so she pivoted and went back to your point, Donna, about the credentials that you need. She went back to grad school at 50 so that she could turn around and come teach in Detroit. So, I mean, I definitely have seen firsthand how hard it is to try and make that pivot to turn. And she already had a bachelor's, so that's not even starting with folks who maybe didn't come through that initial traditional schooling. What does that look like to come in and still try to support? And I think that's how we so often end up with folks in these paraprofessional roles, which are also traditionally underpaid roles. We've been able to increase that to a $15 minimum wage, which is great, but we should be thinking about how folks can be further trained, how they can move more into the kinds of professions that they actually want to be in. And can serve in the ways that they want to serve while living.
Yeah. I mean, the reality is that in a lot of instances, the parapros are doing a great job teaching kids. And so the school districts already rely on these teachers, whether it's substitutes or parapros or whatever. Take them out of the mix, and you're not going to have many functional districts. And in a district like Detroit with such a great shortage, you have long-term subs, you have all of these other arrangements. And the reality is, what we're doing is denying permanence and a standard of living to certain sectors in the teaching field who are instrumental in learning, but don't always have power or access to the resources. So creating pathways within schools where a parapro can take some classes and become a teacher, and we're going to help subsidize that, whatever it is that we do. I'm interested in seeing how we begin to solve the shortage of teaching by not saying, let's go to Ivy League colleges and bring the best and brightest Ivy League people into the city of Detroit, but let's go into our communities and bring up people who have a natural skill and also an interest in teaching and are already doing some of that, and figure out how to get them into the rank of credential educators. And I think that's going to be how we really fill out the profession and also build a more equitable education system, because the point is not just for the teachers and for their equity, it is also for the students and their well-being. Having people who look like them, who come from similar situations, be in charge of educating them is an important factor. So I want to commend Detroit Public Schools for really playing a lead role, as I see it, in addressing some of the labor issues around teaching in Detroit and making teaching a more attractive profession. Like you said, it's not just the salaries, but it's also the training and the culture of the district in terms of supporting teachers, and hope to see continued growth in those other areas.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Terrence Martin, president of DFT, he often describes his members as, folks who are always doing more than with less. And I appreciate that he says that, because I actually think that that reflects the district as a whole. And over this time, we're constantly trying to figure out, how do we increase pay even though we have limited recurring dollars, right? And so we end up in this debate constantly around bonuses versus steps, bonuses versus steps. The bonuses don't impact folks' pension and retirement, but it can get you more cash in your pocket right now. And if our budget only has these one-time funds, it's the best way to get money to teachers, money to staff, right? But obviously the steps are better for your pension and your retirement. So it's like this constant tension. So I'm really proud of the work that's been done here, but the district still isn't funded where it needs to be for us to really take care of our staff and take care of our students the way that we need to. So we're just trying to make it do what it do.
Yeah, that's the long-term conversation that organizations like ours at Detroit Action and some of our partners at 482 Forward, which is really leading on the education fight and parent and youth fight, as well as a few other folks. Really been trying to think about all right, schools aren't being funded the way they need to be funded. We can't pay folks the way they need to pay them. We don't have the resources we need to be. We don't have the resources we need to educate folks the way we should. And this ain't just a Detroit problem. This is actually happening in many other municipalities and many other districts. How are we putting money into the system, and thinking about the long term? And so for us, I'm an advocate of, a graduated income tax. We got to be able to find the money and get the wealthier folks in our state to put the money towards public education. We got to be able to to be able to pay for long-term teachers, to be able to pay for the invest in folks who will stick around for 40 years. And right now, structurally, we don't really spend the type of money that we need to on public education in the state like we should.
I agree. I think that we're talking about trying to fix what we can with what we have right now, and having a long-term structural conversation, a systems change conversation about how we fund the kinds of things that we care about as citizens that will create an equitable and just society, not just around teaching, but just around everything else. And we got to look at taxation, right? Taxation is undergirds all of that. And also, how do we fund schools? We didn't always have a per pupil funding schema. That happened as a result of Proposal A, and it's looking more and more ridiculous as children are learning at home, and we're trying to figure out how to do an accurate count day, which is out.
Right.
right? So I appreciate this discussion about that. And that's going to take us out of our conversation about what's in the news. I mean, we went into, I think, a lot of depth about some of the topics we'll be moving into in a minute. But if you have topics that you want to discuss on Authentically Detroit, you can hit us up on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Authentically Detroit, or email us at authenticallydetroit@gmail.com. So we talked a little bit about some systems change, and we know the systems change involves a whole lot of moving parts. One of them is elections, right? Because you can't change systems unless you change some of the people who are controlling the decision making and also executing on that. So this is an unusual year, right? We have
Understatement.
well, we've got changes in the law that many people don't really understand yet. There's the post office fiasco and also COVID-19. So what do you think is going on, and how do you predict all of these things are going to impact turnout in November, next month?
So, here's the interesting thing is that, typically presidential races, have higher turnout than your municipal races, than your state races, your off-year races. And there's spurred because more people are thinking about the president than they're thinking about the mayor. And then the other thing that we've got because that we saw in the August primary here in Michigan, as well as in the presidential primary, is that more people are going to take advantage of absentee voting. The vote by mail. The challenge, as we all know, is that we're living in COVID right now. And so are people going to, go to the polls? Are people going to actually show up? And the fact, as you alluded to, that the post office is being hijacked. So I think that, there was something that I saw just on a dashboard this morning about, there's been about 400,000 votes cast thus far, as of October 7th, which is roughly 10% of what was cast in 2016. So we are on track to hit that goal, and then people are expecting that our absentee votes will surge and blow past that. So it's going to be a wild ride, just because people have more opportunities to vote. The real question, though, when it all bears out, as we saw in 2016, is it going to be the people who look like me and you that are going to show up? Or is it going to be like the surge of white folks who showed up for Trump on the west side and rural areas?
Well, I mean, go on, Misha.
I just, when I think about Detroit and I think about, the work that we've always had to do to get folks out and make sure that they're informed and ready, and then the impact COVID has had on us being able to stay connected with those folks, especially with the folks who we really need to connect with the most, right? Our folks who are moving, our folks who are changing their phone numbers, all these folks that we normally want to connect with, we normally want to talk to, we normally want to get them engaged. I don't know. And maybe it's just my millennial skepticism. I just always think the world's on fire, although the world is on fire right now. I just am not sure that it's going to be much different. I'm encouraged by the lines of people on the boulevard dropping their ballots off in the drop box. I'm happy about that. But so maybe I'm cautiously optimistic, very cautiously.
Well, I do want to say that when Branden says people who look like us, we have to acknowledge the difference, right? Millennials versus baby boomers like myself. Baby boomers are super hyped and motivated and ready to vote. That's the reason every time you say hello, it's vote. Hi, how are you? Vote.
I do with Biden. Y'all have your own rhymes right now.
I've got a headache. Vote. We are definitely sold on voting, right? Mm-hmm. And so I promise you, if anybody who I know, there's nobody I know who is my age or around my age who would have the courage to tell people they are even thinking about not voting. I mean, it's like, show your I voted sticker so we can remain friends. It's that deep, right?
But that's pretty typical though, right?
Oh, no, no. In 2016, there were a
No.
lot of people who were like, vote. You know, in 2016, people were just like coasting, like, I mean, first of all, we have to acknowledge the existence of sexism.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And the fact that Hillary Clinton would have been the first woman president did impact some people's thinking. Nobody wants to admit to the fact that I don't know about that woman, okay? Joe Biden may have all of the same problems that she has, but he can never have all of the same problems because he's a white man, okay?
Right.
A white man and a white woman are not going to have the same outcome. So I think people did not understand or really take seriously the fact that white female leadership was on trial as much as anything else. And honestly, Black women and white women, we're all women, and people act like but we're not always on the same page, right? So people were not necessarily on fire for her in the way that I think there was that expectation. And there were so many specific down ballot movements in 2016, and we can't ignore the impact of people like Professor Eddie Glade, who's tried to wash his hands, but I still see the stains, by telling people, if you're in a blue state, vote down ballot because your vote doesn't matter.
Mm-hmm.
And in a state like Michigan, 10,000 additional
10,704.
10,704. I don't even know why MSNBC, I mean, he should be fired for malpractice. I remember, and I'm only saying that because it got personal for me. He and I were having Twitter fights. He doesn't know me, but I know him well because I was sending him insults. And then after, the election, everything he tried, I said to him, what did you say?
The Twitter fingers were on fire.
Oh, listen, it was a beef. And I kept it up. I didn't let it go. I was like, now are you happy? He's like, oh, it had nothing to do with me. It's like, dude. But he's not saying vote down ballot anymore. So he has at least understood how stupid that recommendation was, and not understanding the importance of a blue state, and everybody's voting a blue state. So I think that we are in a different moment than we were in 2016. And then finally, many people thought Donald Trump was a joke. I still have friends who say he didn't want to win in 2016.
Yeah.
Oh, he didn't expect to win. He doesn't want to win. So when you think somebody's a joke, you're not necessarily motivated to stop them from ascending to power. If you're thinking, I'm not quite sure about this woman, you're not necessarily motivated to help make it easier for her. And that's where I see, at least with my group, the difference.
Yeah. I would also say too, though, so there are, a couple of big things that happened. One, I think on 100% about like sexism and the role that it plays in politics. I remember, I had in 2016, I was the state youth director for the Clinton campaign. And so, my job was to talk to young people, Black people, and young Black people and make sure that they show up and show out. And that was very hard. And I just remember, on college campuses or at these young professional groups, that there are people who you would look at as like white liberals who would say, well, I'm actually not going to go vote, or I'm going to go vote for Gary Johnson. And so, just the level and depth of like how sexism played into that, or like the arguments of her voice being shrill, or, and just, and heartless, was a lot to take in. I just don't think people are ready. I think the other part too, though, is also structurally, when you think about like how the Democratic Party and how it thinks about votes and how it thinks about like engaging Black folks, at the macro level. I was fortunate to get a piece published in Blavity that was supposed to get published somewhere else. But
great piece, by the way.
Thank you. But it's just, when you think about like how the party at large spends on organizing, they spend on TV, they spend on they spend on radio ads, and they spend on TV, and those things don't actually equal the type of investment that as organizing, which is getting out on the streets, talking to people, making sure that like you or I are talking to our friends and family. And those are harder investments, but those are the more worthwhile investments, because those are the pieces that will move are more
behavior.
Change the behavior, built in trust, and it actually is connected to a lot of like Black cultural like, ideas and beliefs. Is like, we got to see somebody before we vote for them. So, I think that those are like the big structural things that that the party overall has to think about if it wants to like win, and be serious to like win Black votes, going forward, is like investing in black organizers is a real deal.
Yeah. I mean, that's kind of my COVID concern is that it's like, okay, folks who start voting early and keep voting tend to always vote, right? And so that when I think about boomers, I just think about how for many boomers, it's been built in. You've been doing it since you were 18. You keep doing it, right? And I'm just like, okay, but we need more. We need other people. We need new people. We got to get more people out. And I just know that we have lost contact with so many folks, and we're trying to reestablish that contact. And that's just where, and we don't see these folks out here. I mean, I know that I have done lit drops around the city with my mask on. I don't force somebody to talk to me or anything like that, but I mean, I ain't really seen nobody out here for the national thing. I just got a piece of lit in the mail like yesterday, and I have an absentee house.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, like, we're a large canvas. Like our bread and butter is like knocking doors and having people out, and like we aren't sending people out. We're gonna send people out in about a week or two, but like we'd have been out in July, in a normal world, and working up till now. And we're just not, it's just not happening like you would in a normal year. Partly because people don't want to get sick, but other part is that the investment and what the party has decided to spend money on is, white women in the suburbs, because they believe that those are the folks who powered them to victory in 2018. Halfway right, halfway wrong, but I think that's going to be the case that we're gonna find out in a couple of weeks. Like, was that the right gamble?
I mean, I think that it's bigger than all of this, right? I think that my guess is that Biden will probably win because his opponent is not necessarily sane. And people are really afraid of what it means. I mean, nobody's been impacted by COVID-19 more than us. And to hear this president so thoughtlessly dismiss the risks and everything like that, I've never been more angry during a campaign than I am right now. I don't even watch television news. I just read it. And sometimes Facebook is just driving me crazy. But I think that the bigger picture in all of this is that people who are my age and older are voting for people who are my age and older for the most part. We have not figured out how to pass the baton. If the Democratic Party platform seems outdated, it's because the people who are running these systems are too old to maintain charge. When JFK ran, he was the youngest president ever elected president. When Barack Obama ran, he ran as a relatively young candidate for president and had a definite youth vote appeal. When you have a 74-year-old running against a 78-year-old, I hope I have the ages right, somewhere in that, it really speaks to something that's really unhealthy. When the Speaker of the House is also as old as Nancy Pelosi is, and we're mourning the death of RGB, who, was really in her day a trailblazer, but in 2020 was not quite a trailblazer. And we had to look at all of the flaws in the trail that she blazed. I think that we have got to do a better job of passing the baton and preparing to let young people take charge, because that's where the energy is. And the only people who are going to energize young people are going to be young people on the ballot. You've seen AOC do that. I think that Rashida did that somewhat. I think that we're seeing some of that even in some local races where you have younger people, the younger perspective and younger voices who have connection to younger people, really changing the dynamics of our politics. So the good news is at some point, people are going to be unable to run for office and they're going to have to pass the baton. It's going to be maybe snatched from a death grip, but you're going to have to pass that baton somehow. I think that what we have to do, though, is figure out how to get engaged and how to organize between now and the next big election so that we Don't let it happen by happenstance or by accident, but we're actually planning for that. And we're going to need more young people engaged in party politics to take the reins. So disengaging from party politics and saying, this isn't my party, I want to join a third party, allows older people to hold on to power, don't you think?
I struggle with this, honestly. I never see more age discrimination than I do during a presidential election year. Like, I mean, just like the way that we talk about age and the way we talk about older people is just wild to me. And you know, age discrimination is one of the few areas of discrimination that is still so baked into our everyday lives that we find it acceptable and we don't check it. So I think, I mean, what I'm looking for more so is more age diversity. So I don't think that our, you know, national electeds should be all younger people or all older people. I think there should be some diversity there. I think that there's value added from all of those experiences. And I think we all can think of some younger elected folks who don't do nothing. So like youth in and of itself, it's not.
We're not gonna say no names, but
yeah. We're not gonna say no names.
That's not at all what I mean. When I'm certainly not trying to put myself out of the picture. I'm certainly not trying to pull myself out and say I no longer qualify. But I will say that if I did not listen to young people and hear from young people, I would not have the relevant things to add to this conversation.
So that's what I'm trying to go with it, though.
A lot of my peers literally have closed themselves off to hearing from younger voices and are right now blaming or preparing to blame young people for everything that might happen in November. And so the fact that Branden went to Blavity and not where he thought he was going to be able to go speaks to control over the voice and conversation about all of this. And when a young person speaks up, what do they hear from us? Vote.
No, so that's where I was going with it, was about the disconnect across our generations. And I think what I just am looking for and what I attempt to do in my own life is to facilitate more connection across these generations, so that we really can, because the other thing that happens from younger folks is so often my peers come through with an idea that they think is the first time it has ever been presented and lose a lot of time trying to refine that idea or refine that approach, missing some information. So I overall just look for more connection across. And I think that part of that too, to your point, means younger people can't disengage from party politics. Like, you got to keep showing up and you got to keep connecting.
You know, and that last part is challenging for me because, you know, I consider myself Dr. Martha King type democratic socialist, you know, like, you know, having read Where Do We Go From Here, having read those books, having done organizing, and I don't feel like I have a place in the Democratic Party. But also, to the point that both of y'all are making, is like, you gotta be there, you gotta be in the room where it happens, you know, like Hamilton. So, you know, but it's just hard because the level of age discrimination that happens on the other side is like, well, you know, are you actually, you know, where, you know, the worth and actually validity of your work is nullified because of age. Yeah. And so I think that that's the challenge that we face. And I think like one of the solutions, if we want to get, you know, a Congresswoman Stallworth or somebody like that, you know, in the future, is like, we got to be able to build like the candidate pipeline that happens, you know, that starts folks, you know, from dog catcher all the way up to Congresswoman, or, mm-hmm. you know, and, you know, has this sort of like mentorship baked into it. And we got
to start holding people accountable for getting shit done. Yeah. Like, so many of these Congress people are in these offices for decades and decades and decades. And then when you actually look at their track record, they've done nothing. So it's like, if we're addressing our accountability differently, we'll also see some turnover that's more meaningful.
Yeah.
That there's a couple of things. I think that there is the myth that in the 1960s, we fixed racism with some marches and protests, and life got better after that. And for people who were my age, I remember when I went to college, Ronald Reagan was elected president the year before I turned 18. And so it was a horrible time for me to come of age at a time when Ronald Reagan is now president. It was actually absolutely terrible. But but also I had a lot of friends who really bought into this concept of we've made it. I went to college. I did all of the things I need to do. We've made it. And raised children, and with the mantra of, I'm not going to expose my children to talk to them about racism because we've made it and we don't want to traumatize them with the truth. And so a lot of us assimilated into spaces, those people with power and money and education, into spaces where we try to protect our children from Blackness. But you can't protect your children from Blackness. And so a lot of children learned the hard way what it meant to be Black, either through school experiences, encounters with the police, workplace experiences, but probably the biggest thing that happened from where I sit is the housing crisis, where, you know, millions of Black homes were destabilized by a loss of housing, and that targeted Black families. And then racism started to come out again, and people started saying, wait a minute, this is not the world you thought we thought we inherited. We feel lied to. And we have to be honest that activism between 1968 and 2018 among certain people was pretty much dead. You didn't have a lot of people fighting for a lot of things. When Michelle Alexander wrote the book, The New Jim Crow, she noted that mass incarceration happened. First of all, you had certain Black people who voted for mass incarceration, or, you know, the crime bills, not just one, but the bills, who helped sell those bills in their communities. But also the NAACP wasn't talking about it. The Urban League wasn't talking about it. The Congressional Black Caucus wasn't talking about it. People were going to DC at partying for a whole weekend, the Congressional Black Caucus weekend, without dealing with or contending with mass incarceration. And so I think accountability is more than just what you do in Washington. Accountability is saying, maybe we dropped the ball, and maybe we don't have all the answers. And maybe the fact that we marched with Martin Luther King does not make us gods, and does not make us knowledgeable about all things. There was so much work that remained undone after all of those gains were won in the courts and in the courts and at the, you know, the congressional level. So coming back, it's going to take all of us to sit down, humble ourselves, and say, you know what, we need to find some answers. And some of that is people who have some more power sharing that power with people who are coming up underneath them, because I can't hold you account. Yes, there's young people, and a lot of times the reason young people aren't doing things and make it to office is because those are the ones the older people allow to come into their ranks, because they don't threaten what their worldview. So I want to challenge my peers to acknowledge the fact it's not our fault. You know, after all those centuries of fighting, it's not our fault that we got tired of fighting and just wanted to share in the American dream. But it is our responsibility to understand that we are not there yet.
Right.
So,
yeah. And I think I try to challenge, I mean, I think like challenging our peers is so important, right? So I think I also try to challenge my peers to have some compassion for what it's like to have survived and just try to enjoy some success. Just try, like, because we tired right now. I'm 30 and I'm tired, right? So like, of course my dad is tired, right? You know what I mean? And all he wanted for me and for my brothers was that we could have top quality education, that we could move up socioeconomically, right? Like he just wanted us to be able to accomplish these things. And you do settle into a routine of compromising, of like the lesser evil approach that folks are so frustrated right now, right? And so I think that there's room, to your point, Donna, about kind of like power sharing and compassion and just understanding across all of our generations. You know, my brothers are Gen Xers, so they were way more bought into, you know, racism is over than I was. Yeah. Right? Their experience is way different. Our discussions about classism versus racism are very interesting. And then you come to millennials and poor Gen Zers, you know.
Zoomers have it really rough because they've I mean, just like millennials like us, like we've lived through 2 economic crises, you know, and they're looking at it like, man, y'all didn't fix any of this. Like, Yeah. So
and they live on the internet way more than, well, old millennials. You know, we're older.
Yeah, I'm an older millennial. Yeah. So I think the other part is like, shared governance is also, it can't just be, oh, I work with Misha, oh, I work with Rashida, and oh, they listen to us. It has to be like, how are we building in a community? And like, how are we thinking about like having the next Misha, the next Rashida, the next whomever, and that's what shared governance is. Like, are we thinking and building the same, timeline and building the same sort of like vision for our community together? Because I think that's the piece that is also missing. Like we're having these conversations about, defund the police and, canceling rent. And, my baby boomers are looking at me like, you're crazy. But this is actually the conversation. This is the policy platforms that younger people and people who are struggling, are gravitating to because the system isn't working. And so there's a disconnect right now in this moment around what actually works and who is being listened to.
Yeah, sometimes it's language, and sometimes we have to be willing to find ways to talk to each other.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody has their pet peeves. Defund the police is not an accurate description of what the movement is about. It is in your face. It is, really challenging, and there's room for that. But if you're trying to talk to Black senior citizens, defund the police is going to get you nowhere. So we're going to have to find different ways to talk to our own. And that speaks to that compassion, that willingness to be concerned with how other people receive information and what it may mean to them. And sometimes it is, being willing to spend some time explaining and listening to each other. We need forums. We do more of that and less just attacking. I try not to, we have to always think through what kind of speakers we're going to bring into our realm. And I try to bring people who can be thoughtful and, very passionate about their beliefs, but leave the other side unharmed, right? You don't want to bring in that kind of thing where if I don't agree with you, that means that there's something, inherently wrong with me, because it just doesn't promote that kind of learning. But I think, one of the lessons that we've forgotten about the civil rights movement was Martin Luther King, who was, I believe, 26 years old in Birmingham. He was actually from Birmingham, and he was drafted to represent a movement and to stand out front. All the elders came together and said, this is our guy. And that was an intergenerational thing. Now, my understanding is that the SCLC and SNCC had some conflicts with each other about who's in charge, but they pulled it together and they made it work. So when we talk about preparing the next person, the next persons, it seems as though we try to do that without really thinking through what we're preparing them for. Are we clear on what a Black agenda might look like if we all got together and created one? What causes? I hear Ice Cube talk about a Black agenda, and it sounds like the Wall Street Project that Jesse Jackson had, where you shake down people with money, and well, maybe not, but give us a piece of the pie. Seems like what he's saying. I haven't listened to it because I was turned off by some of his language. But some of us are talking about the environment. We're talking about workers' rights and housing rights and water rights and things that some people who are talking about a Black agenda don't care about.
Yeah. I mean, I'm a huge proponent that everybody has a job to do, right? Like there's a role, there's a place for everyone. Even when we talk about language, defund the police is provocative, and there's room for provocative. Provocative is necessary. So I think, with the agenda stuff, my biggest hope for an agenda is that it is connected to immediate steps you can take right now. I just think as different agendas have presented themselves, sometimes they are so focused on vision that they then miss okay, so what's the next step, right? And so I've seen some things recently where I've appreciated that it's been more compact, like, okay, here's the next step, here's right now. But I don't know that there has to be a single agenda as long as folks are playing their role or doing what they need to be doing. Brandon's probably better to talk.
My office partner, Keisha the dog, is demanding that she goes out, so I'm gonna try and just be quiet. But it's hard to say, like to that point. Like I feel like when Ice Cube talks about, yeah, let's we need to get money from these folks. We need to billionaires. Like the challenge that I feel like it's like bad practices because partially I agree. Yes, the wealthy need to pay their fair share. Yes, corporate, we need to close corporate loopholes. But that's not what he's saying, and it's not the articulation of what he's saying doesn't actually solve the problems that y'all know that our community is facing when it comes to environmental justice, when it comes to education justice, when it comes to housing justice. And so I'm challenged when I hear these calls for a Black agenda, because in my mind it sounds like we need to be talking about democratic socialism, but we're not talking about it in the same realm, and that becomes the problem, that we're not speaking the same language. We're not taking the time to communicate and translate and actually build one. We're talking past each other.
Well, I think we do need social justice agenda, though. I think that the reason the civil rights worked is everybody understood that we wanted to integrate lunch counters, and everybody understood that we didn't want to sit on the back of the bus. If some people want to integrate lunch counters and other people are saying we just want to build our own deli, then we're not going to be able to harness and leverage our strength as a people on a single, and then there were, of course, people who did just want their own delis and didn't care about the lunch counters. But I think the movement has to be around a single objective or a set of shared objectives, not everything, not exhaustive, but it feels as though we should have some shared objectives that we're all fighting for if we want to really leverage our strength.
But I think that that's where the more specific asks do help to build leverage, right? Like when we talk about the March on Washington, there was a list of things that were very specific that, were the demands. But I don't know, I just, within a white supremacist society, the agenda is always gonna be everything, right? Because it's our whole lives. It's literally everything that impacts us and that is maintaining oppression. So that's why I struggle with a single agenda, and I think it's more about folks talking to okay, if your priority is environmental justice, talk with the folks whose priority is economic, and find places of commonality, find places to move together. Because the other area that I feel like we have lost so much is in arguing about what the priority should be. Arguing about, no, we need to build allies, or arguing about, no, we need to focus on Black businesses. And then folks disconnect and they stop working together entirely. And I think that that's a loss. I think that's a huge loss.
Yeah, right on. And the other thing I would say too in that is that what's lost in the conversations about the March on Washington is that, one of the other demands was that we wanted to increase minimum wage, and so you can't disentangle, economic justice from racism and white supremacy. They all, interlocked, and you got to tackle them both at the same time.
But you have to have some policy objectives, okay? Or else what you're going to have is hit or miss. And what you're going to have is electing people and just hoping they do something good, whatever that something is. And if they don't touch on your something, for us to not have a housing agenda when housing has been an issue for Black people in America since we have been here is obscene to me. Now, if we can't agree that housing is a human right and everybody should have access to a home, how can I agree with you on anything? I can't talk to you about your health care. I can't talk to you about education. I can't even talk to you about the environment. Just imagine how global warming feels to a homeless person. So when we start talking about issues like housing, if we're unwilling to center ourselves around basic human rights, if water is something that's a fringe issue for some, and if we have to talk about water, I can't care about it, then I really question how we can care about anything, because there are agendas that feel very much like, let's figure out a way to help some Black people make money. Let's figure out a way to help privilege certain groups of people. But to me, we should have some bottom line things that we demand of all people. Republicans do it all the damn time. I'm sorry, I cursed, and I'm gonna have to put something on there. Republicans do it all of the time. Women, people who advocate for women are going to advocate for one fair wage. People who advocate for women are going to advocate for a woman's right to choose. And even though that is a very controversial issue, they don't back down. And the only reason you still have the right to choose right now legally is because there are people who are willing to fight for it. Every election, every Supreme Court appointment, every time somebody does something. We are very malleable, it seems to be, in our politics, and it makes it very difficult for us to exert power. The other thing I'm going to say is that most of the great things that have happened, whether it is, I don't want to say great, most of the advancements we've made in justice have taken tens, decades, centuries, not years. They're not short, actionable things. School desegregation was not something that happened in one congressional term. There were so many civil rights cases fought before the Supreme Court between, I don't know, the 1920s and 1950s around that modern cause that finally the Supreme Court ruled. Are we willing to tackle big issues that talk about justice? We may not be able to fix housing in one congressional term. It may take us, or one presidential term, it may take us several. I'm just wondering if sometimes we are not so pragmatic that we forget to be idealistic and shoot for the stars.
Yeah, I also think, like, when you talk about strategy, yeah, literally is like, I want to get in and talk about this. This is fascinating to say. But so when you talk about strategy, like, you know, the NAACP knew at the time that, like, hey, the Supreme Court is where we want to actually, like, you know, engage, and this is the battlefield that we want to play on. And then, you know, when they decided that that wasn't going to work anymore, you know, they moved to, like, you know, federal legislation. So I think for us, it's also like, have we figured out an ID what the battlefield, what the playground is that we want to, you know, actually engage on? I don't know. And part of me feels like it is the local level, like it is, you know, it is engaging at, you know, at the municipal level, but I'm just not sure, because in cities like Detroit, where we're, you know, preempted up to the gills on policy, I don't know. But I do look at other cities across the country that are moving economic agendas, that are, you know, trying to push forward a homes guarantee. You know, that's a federal policy, but they're able to make those policies happen.
What cities don't have problems with homelessness?
No, I don't disagree with you on that. I think that, like, when we talk about, home, you know, when we talk about our policies and what the playground is, maybe it is a city level fight that we should be thinking about, like organizations, activists need to be going after mayors and city councils. I am struggling, I guess, with, like, actualizing it, I guess.
Well, you know, I guess my feeling is that when housing patterns change, they always happen at the federal level. The FHA was not local. It's implemented at a local level. HUD was not local. Hope 6 was not local. All of the big changes in housing, public housing, did not come from local funds. So when we do it at the local level, which I think we need to have organizing at the local level, but when we don't connect our local issues to federal sources, that's where we don't really have the money to do what we need to do. Because if they're cutting taxes at the federal level and defunding HUD at the federal level, and we're trying to fix housing at the local level, it won't work. We will make incremental change. We're still going to have those issues. We have a national issue of housing. Right now, everybody's struggling. Black people are struggling more than any other group of people because of historic patterns, and also, you know, our poverty, our relative poverty in relation to everybody. So I think that, in my view, in my worldview, if we could get a good set of 4 or 5 things that we say these are our bottom line issues, and we can all agree on these things, then you can have your 6 things, 7, 8, 9, that you agree on, and I may not fight with you on those things, but we've got to have at least 3 or 4 issues that we are collectively aligned around, and trying to figure out how to get everybody from top to bottom in our nation to somehow buy in. And I think that when we start talking about those types of systemic changes, that's when young people get excited, because they know we're trying to do something other than rearrange the furniture, that we're actually shooting for something big.
I agree with you. I think that when you have those 5 things, you still need items that folks can wrap their heads around to coalesce around, right? So, you know, minimum wage, decriminalizing marijuana, right? Like, you need those things that are doable, because we need wins in order to continue feeling encouraged, even when they're small. You know, that's just part of human nature. right? You can't, if you're failing all the time, you definitely start to lose people. So I think the five, and I think I see the big things. All right, that would be the drag racing on my street. I think I see the big things in common across many different agendas and many different organizations. The place where I tend to get stuck is just, okay, so what are those, what's the list of stuff that we gonna get done right now that I can go out and talk to people from lots of different backgrounds and say, okay, here's one specific item, right? So that's where I struggle, and that's where I see stuff start to break down. And I think, Donna, where it comes into play, how we're connecting local with federal policy, because typically when those lists are made, you then have something you can target and say, okay, here's how it's connected to federal, here's how it's connected to local.
Yeah,
Well,
and I was just gonna say, like, the reason why I brought up, like, you know, I think the playground is cities and municipalities in this moment is that, you know, when we look at our federal legislature, you know, the House and the Senate, you know, we're gerrymandered to hell, and we're also, you know, hyper partisan and polarized more so than we've ever been, and you know, in those chambers, you know, history. And so I think that the federal fights are right. Like when you look at like the homes guarantee and the and all the make it home movements that Rep. Ilhan Omar and Rashida Tlaib pushed for back in the earlier part of the spring before the pandemic, or you think about the Green New Deal, you know, these are like rallying calls to, like, you know, have intersectional fights at the federal level. You know, I question and I wonder, like, what is it going to take from organizing, from, you know, from Black folks on the left, you know, whomever, like, how do we break through the hyper-polarization and the gerrymandering that has essentially, like, tried to marginalize and depower our movements?
Yeah, I'm not sure I know either. I just think that if we are crystal clear that these are some things that are worth fighting for, everybody having a home is something I'm just willing to fight for, right? I think it is obscene that people don't have homes. People having water is something I'm willing to fight for. And we're at a moment right now where people are supposed to be sheltering in place and washing their hands all the time so they don't make us sick, where I think we also understand the reciprocity or the interconnectedness of all of us, that we've really got to solve these problems in the long term. Right now, we have eviction suspended. And so landlords are, you know, not able to collect money. Some of them are going to go bankrupt because they can't collect money because we haven't figured out a way to finance housing so that we can pay the landlords and everybody benefits. I think it's how we shape some of our arguments. I'm not sure I have the answer right now. I just think that if our generations were to come together around some causes that make a whole lot of sense, like water and housing and pollution or school or whatever it is that we say we think we need, we could have traction. Yeah. Brilliant. Could sit together and come up with implementation steps, benchmarks, short-term, long-term goals, vision, all of that. And some of that would intersect with national movements. We could also create a scorecard of candidates and people in office so we could say, how are they doing on these issues? We said we prioritize them. How are they doing it? And that's how, to me, we build power, because we work collaboratively across sectors, but we have clear vision of success. I'm not going to ask you what you're going to do for me. I'm going to say, these are the things I need you to do for me. Will you do them? And then track whether you did them, right?
Yeah. And I think, I mean, I know separately, you and I had talked for a second about the Black to the Future agenda. And I think, so the way they've outlined things actually kind of gets to what I like to see, which is, okay, here's the high level concept, and here's a list of some specific things. Whereas other agendas I've seen, you know, for example, I don't believe in prisons, but when I see an agenda that says, let everybody out of prison immediately, I'm kind of like, I don't know that we gonna get that one done, y'all. And like, I don't know that that's the way to move on this issue. Despite my beliefs, it's like, I get where it's coming from, but we need like a couple bullet points up under there.
100%. And like, just doubling back what we were saying earlier, you know, like, so I'm an abolitionist. My thought process has been abolitionist. My academic training around, like, and how I got into organizing was, you know, how do we think about organizing to like create diversion opportunities? And I think about defund the police in this moment as like people who, you know, got caught up in the catchphrase and didn't think about the fact that we actually need to be doing the harm reduction strategies to make sure that people have homes, have treatment and all those things if we're going to even do any decarceration. And so all of that, when we talk about movements, like Black to the Future or any of these things, it has to be centered, for me at least, in like community care. Like the things that are missing are the things that we need, and like how are we connecting our policy solutions to like actually that are rooted in care.
I agree with you, and I think that we have to keep our eye on all things. I think that we have to look at changing what we can on the local level and not waiting for big federal changes before we start trying to achieve more equity at the local level. I think we have to be willing to go to the state and make demands on our state, because we are all taxpayers there as well, and we should have more of a voice on things. And the agendas that get pushed at the state level are very rarely coming from the grassroots of Detroit. We don't even really do that anymore, and there was a time when we did, so I'm in agreement with all of that. So I just have a couple more questions for you. What do you think of the polling that predicts a landslide for loss for Donald Trump? Are those polls accurate?
I'm still scarred from 2016. I don't know.
Polling.
Yeah. We so one, no, it's not gonna be a landslide unless something wild happens. Like, granted, wild stuff has already happened, but I just can't see it being like a blowout. Like my mind just can't wrap myself around. It'll just be a complete blowout where he'll lose by like double digits.
But will you go out and celebrate if he does, though?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Out like in my front yard. It actually reminds me of what we were talking about earlier in terms of the sexism that Hillary experienced. And I remember when she caught the flu, and everyone was like, I don't know if she can lead. She's too sickly, right? And I'm just like, those concerns have not presented themselves about this man. So the way folks are, I don't know about a landslide.
Well, the way that some people are very, fluid, because 2 weeks ago, wasn't it Biden who was too sick to lead?
Yeah, well, he even updated their polling.
All of a sudden, Trump does this crazy stuff. So, I mean, his crazy people are always going to vote for him. I do think that I've been reading polling that senior citizens are turned off. They're the ones who feel as though their lives have been sacrificed, and that cannot be good for Donald Trump if senior citizens are abandoning him. So I'm not sure if it's true, but if it is true, it's not a good thing. So is there anything else important to you on this ballot in November? State, city, federal?
The person who's on the ballot, I would say, I'm really interested in, it's cliche to say all of them, but I think that like when we think about in Michigan, our Senate race, Gary Peters versus John James, so do we want to get a Trump acolyte, or do we want Gary Peters? Do we want, and then I'm thinking about the Michigan Supreme Court, which, there's a potential to flip the Supreme Court and have it be, majority Democrat. And why that's important to me is that, we just saw the Supreme Court overturn the governor's executive powers. The Supreme Court has been making some decisions around like compensation for people who've been wrongly accused and wrongly incarcerated. And, when minimum wage and earned pay sick time were overturned or, were gutted, they sat on their hands and didn't decide on it. So I think those are like the two big ones in my mind. So Michigan Supreme Court and then the Senate.
And not proposal N, Branden?
I wanted to offer a plug to something else. But yes, proposal N is a big one because that's a $250 million bond with another $240 million in interest that we'll be spending, and not really sure what the results will be.
What about you, Misha? Got anything on the ballot other than the presidential election coming up?
So I'm also very interested in the Supreme Court. I've been encouraged by the level of engagement folks have had in these elected officials within our quote unquote justice system. And so I'm very interested in that and very interested in how we're able to build momentum going beyond this election with keeping folks engaged and starting to look at how we can evaluate judges in a more meaningful way, even at the local level. I am very interested in school board, not because, yes, because I'm on the school board, but also because, right now, especially with COVID, it's just a really critical time for leadership with our public schools, period. Whether I was on the ballot or not, it would just be a really critical role that I'd be looking at right now.
But since you are on the ballot, can you tell us why you're running?
Sure. So I'm running for a number of reasons. I'm running for many, many reasons. In 16, we were coming into a district that essentially needs to be rebuilt, and like infrastructure, policies, curriculum that actually met standards, all those kinds of things. And like, we stepped into it knowing that it couldn't get done in 4 years. I knew that I had been elected for 4 years and the schools would not be where they needed to be in 4 years. And so one thing is I just really want to continue that work. I really want to keep going and keep improving. I think the other thing is facing COVID, knowing that that's going to set us back. I really do think that myself and the other 2 women I'm running with have built up our experience, our skills, have really shown the dedication and the ability to make decisions that move us forward in really challenging circumstances. And like I said earlier, I want this organization to be one that people actually want to work in, that families want to be a part of, and where kids are getting what they need to actually, move out in the world and actualize their dreams. As it might sound cliche, but I really mean it, because those are the things that I've been really fortunate to have in my life. And I see every baby in my community is deserving of that as well.
Well, thank you. So I think right now I'm going to go to shout outs and closing. So anybody you want to shout out? Anybody you want to recognize for good work or exceptional service to the community?
I always want to shout out my husband, Terrence West, who is an East Sider and works hard on education issues as well. So I always want to shout him out.
Now, what does he do on education issues?
So right now he's marketing communications manager for Teach for America Detroit. But he's also worked at the Science Center. He's on the board for Black Family Development and Living Arts Detroit. And so he just really tries to do whatever he can for our babies.
Oh, anybody else?
My mama, shout out to my mama, shout out to my daddy.
You mentioned your dad, and you come from a pretty well-known family around here, pretty, famous family around here in politics. Who is your dad?
My dad's name is Thomas Stallworth. He's a former state rep. He was on the school board at one point. Also worked on the Hillary campaign in 2016, and now he's doing some work with the governor.
Right. And your grandmother is Alma Stallworth, the late Alma Stallworth, who just passed away, and was blazed a trail for so many people in the state of Michigan.
Yes, she did. I've been thinking a lot about how we document our local leaders and officials. I'm real passionate about local stuff. And a lot of times we don't know all the work that folks are doing in our state houses or on council unless they have gotten some kind of notoriety for some reason. So that's been on my spirit lately.
Okay, great. Branden, any shout outs?
I also want to shout out Misha's dad, who I got to know really well when I was on the Clinton campaign in 2016. That was my homie, and when things were going amiss, he would take his smoke breaks, and like that's what we would be talking about.
He
So,
doesn't smoke anymore.
I know. I've seen him post on that. It's really good. Yeah, but yeah, that was my guy during 16. I think for me, my shout outs are, a lot of people that are like our members and people who used to be our members are more active for Detroit Action, and even when we were Detroit Action Commonwealth. So one of them is Sherry Meadows, who is a ECN organizer. She was, part of our early homeless organizing work that we were doing at the Capital Soup Kitchen in 2010.
Wow.
I'm thinking about folks like, shouting out like Donna Price, who is on our, our housing committee and our executive board, who 2 years ago was homeless and was, housing insecure. And, we think about like the fact that the face of homelessness is like just change. It's just different. It's not just the people who are on the streets. It's people who are couch surfing and in cars, and people who have jobs but just no stable place to stay. So like, people like that, and people who are the ones who are like running this movement for us at Detroit Action. So those are my two shout outs.
Okay. Well, I'm gonna be like Misha. I'm gonna shout out my husband because I can't get away with not doing that now. Kevin Davidson and his work at the Charles Wright Museum, designing the Voting Matters exhibit. And so that's been a labor of love for him, and also just something that I really think is relevant and extremely well done. If you haven't taken a look at it, go to the museum and check it out. It's amazing. And I want to shout out the Eastside Extravaganza. We are having the extravaganza on the 22nd. Shout out everybody who has contributed and sponsored us. We really appreciate the sponsorships. And I want to shout out Marlo Stoudemire, who will be receiving posthumously the Eastside Legend Award. And I can't think that award had to be made for him. And shout out Orlando, who is the hardest working man in Zoom world. He is hosting more Zoom meetings. He was so tired out, he had to take the week off, but I really appreciate the enthusiasm and grace he brings to very challenging topics and the leadership he exercises doing the work. So I want to also thank you, Misha, and you, Branden, for the leadership that you are providing as millennial Detroiters, helping to prepare the future for all of us. And thank everybody for listening. Catch the wave, and we will see you next week.